Look through the round window. There's the scene.
All right, man. Welcome to Crow 777 Radio. This is episode 301. Jason Lindgren is with me, and we have a special guest who contacted us from, let's just say, the Scandinavia area, and he's going to use the pseudonym Sui Generis, which is Latin, an interesting Latin term you can look up, by the way. We're going to get back into, I guess the overarching way I would describe this as your status in the world. How do you come to be the status that you are? And it starts when you're born. And actually that's not true from the work of Kurt Kallenbach and others. We know that we come to be a lot earlier than the actual birthing event. But what we're going to do here in hour one, we're going to cover documents that have been attained and how they were attained by our guest that add evidence to what goes on when a new life is birthed. We're not talking comes to be at the zygote, although that will be covered. And in hour two, we're going to describe and explain what evidence is derived from the documents that were obtained. And all these documents have to do with the so-called birth of our guest, which he was able to track down. And from, we met, a week or two ago. I think it was a little over a week ago. And the amount of effort that had to be put in to chase down these documents. And it's kind of astounding that as he was chasing them down, the people in charge have no clue what anything means. It's really quite a system we've come to. But anyhow, welcome, Jason.
And a frigid good morning to you.
Yeah, we're about to get hit too from that storm that came through Texas and wreaked havoc. But you want to just jump in here?
Yep, let's do it.
All right, welcome, Sui.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you.
Well, we're always, people comment a lot saying, well, which way is it? This guest said this and this guest said that. And I think that's the whole point, is to get as many points of view to add, because without Kurt Kallenbach, in my view, we would have been missing one of the most important ideas. Matter of fact, I had never even considered the idea of the zygote that Kurt put on the table. The moment he said it, a bell rang. I mean, I knew that I had been missing an important idea. And all these other people up through the law series have come at different angles. But I think that in the long run, that helps as many angles as we can get. But what you've done here is you've dug in and actually documented chronologically what happened. This happened, then this happened. This document was generated and so forth. Would you like to add anything before we jump in here?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And it's kind of my background as well, because I have done a lot of research on this, but it's very scattered. There's so many different sources and so many different sites and researchers. Some of them are better than others, but it's been a long journey for me. And I agree with you also that when Kurt was on, that sort of clicked. It added a crucial piece in the puzzle, and it really helped me to get this going on another level.
Yeah, so, it kind of snaps your mind back from our commerce-based system back to more spiritual concerns, right? The reality of where we are.
Yeah, the reality is the point there. And basically, if you look at a lot of people put out all kinds of documents or document templates, and you just do this or you say this in court or something like that. But if you don't know what it means, if you don't know why you need to say something, then is it really wise to do that? Because you're taking a huge leap of faith using somebody else's document. So what I decided a while ago was that I'm not going to do anything before I know what I'm doing. So before I can write my own documents, I'm not going to start just sending people stuff and sort of trying it out. And now it's becoming pretty clear, and there's no problem. It's fun to listen to these episodes because there's a lot more perspective to what people say, and that sort of connects to what I'm about to talk about as well.
All right. So before we jump in, I'll ask a point blank question. With everything that you've learned that we will lay down in this episode, is it your intention to reestablish your standing on the tail of all the research you've done? Will you do something to change, I don't even know what the words are, to how you're classified by the commerce-based system?
I think it's done already.
Okay.
It's interesting thing. It's really, when we go through this documentation, it's actually on the record already. But it might not work like this for everybody, but basically I don't see the reason why you could not use their own documentation to prove it.
All right, so I'll say one more thing before you get started. Since the majority of the subscribers here are UK, United States, Canada, mostly what we consider the Western world, you'll have to use your brain to associate. And I'll do a quick breakdown here. There's going to be a chronology of what happened and the documents that are generated at the so-called birth. Now, we're going to open with pregnancy notes from what he calls the pregnancy ward. Now, I'm not 100% sure that in the United States and other places we use those words verbatim, but I do suspect that there are counterpart documents that play the same role. So here's what we're going to cover in hour one. Pregnancy ward notes and the laboratory records, the cesarean section report, the birth report, the certificate of live birth, the notification of a child on the popular register. There's one that may need to be translated. The population register, extract from the population register, again, the birth certificate, and then the correspondence that Sui did with various government officials. And I think that's enough to get you going. So go ahead, lead us in.
All right. Yeah, so it really started from these episodes, and I knew that the birth certificate is sort of a crucial document, and I saw a couple of videos from all over the world on that, and I never had one myself, so I thought, okay, let's dig into this. I ordered one myself, and it was an easy thing. I just clicked through a website, and there was a question whether or not I want it certified. So basically, what you can attach to it or ask to be attached is a certification by the authorities on the authenticity of that document, which is used typically internationally. If you take one government document to another country, then you need to prove it's the real deal. Then you have that certification there. So I got that. They sent it, and then I took a look at it. I read through it, and it was really on that certification one sentence that caught my eye, and it's like a classic. It was in small print, kind of like under the main part of the document. And what it said was that this certificate, so it was done properly, so it was stamped and hand signed, and there was a certification of authenticity. But it said that this certification is specifically on the fact that this is an extract from the population register, but it's not a certification of the content to be correct. And that sort of triggered the whole waterfall here, because I then just immediately wrote them back. There was the person who certified it, her name was on it, so I just wrote her back and asked, what does this mean? How do I know this is correct? Was basically my question. And then we did some emails back and forth, and I proceeded to ask, well, how did you get this information on the record? Because I didn't know at that time. And then a few emails later, she laid out the process, how it worked at the time. So basically, she said that there's a document that the hospital sends to the keeper of the population register or the registrar, and then the registrar makes another document, which then becomes the source document for the register entry into the record or the population record.
Let me just cut in for a second here. I may be mistaken, but I think what's going on here is the equivalent where we are in the United States. That might be the idea of a birth certificate from the hospital, and then a new one gets made up at the state level, but I'm not certain. Go ahead, Sui.
Yeah, so you have to be very careful with the terms here. That's why I individually named these documents, and these are the real names or titles of the documents here. because they're not the same thing. The hospital doesn't give out birth certificate. It gives out a certificate of live birth.
Right. Right. I misspoke, of course.
Yeah, but and this is very important because it's a different document. And then there's the third document, which is sort of in between those two, which is the notification of a child to the population register. So let's go through these, and let's go now. So then when I started digging back on that path, so basically I contacted everybody who was sending or producing these documents back at the time. And I asked them to send a copy to me because I was just digging deeper and deeper. And I got it all. So basically, now if we jump in and start going through the documents in a chronological order, not chronologically how I got these, but chronologically what happened, I think that makes more sense. So if I just start from the first one, so basically, obviously, the hospital had the first records. And the first ones are my mom going, for visits and checking like lab tests and whatever when you're pregnant. And those records, they might not be that important, but I think there's a good detail there, which is the fact that those prove that I was alive before the birth date. Because, there's mentions like, kicking and moving and, whatever. Just a small detail which might become handy here later on. And then the first really, really important document was when my mom went to the hospital, and they actually did like an emergency C-section. I don't know all of the details of why that happened, but basically they have it pretty well documented. So there's two documents specifically. There's the actual, when you do an operation in a hospital, you have to write a report. So the surgeon writes a report of what happened, what did they do, and that is like it's like a journal entry. So it's just a free hand, blank paper, typewritten explanation of what happened. Now, on that document, there's a couple of really important details. So he describes the whole process chronologically, and basically the crucial part is that he describes how he took me out after cutting open my mom's belly. And then after that, later on, he describes cutting the cord, which is what Kalamba is talking about in that sequence. So basically, it evidences me being around as a whole man before that cut. Now, interestingly, that report is dated the next day because this was late in the evening. So the report is not dated on the day that they call the birthday. Now, the next piece of evidence is what is called birth report. It's a hospital document. Again, it's a form, like a template with boxes and little titles on the boxes of what to write there. So that's a super interesting one because it has two sections. It has one section which is titled The Child and another section which is titled The Birth. And the section where it says The Child has the measurements of the boy, like time of birth and the weight and a bunch of other stuff. And then under the section Birth, it has the measurements and the time of birth of the placenta, the weight, and basically the same data under two different headings, and the placenta is under the heading birth. Okay, and this is hand-signed by a nurse, so I know who did it, where it was done. And then, again, this one was dated after the next day, because basically this is, again, late in the evening, they did it the next day, based on whatever they remembered or whatever. So then the next document is the certificate of live birth. And you've heard a lot about this document. People mention it a lot, and it's not the birth certificate, it's a certificate of live birth. And it's super important to get that term right because the latter part of it, the live birth, is actually a term of art. I'll explain it later.
You said a term of art, right?
Yeah. So
Okay.
term of art. So let's do a quick detour on that. Term of art is any word that is used in a specific scientific context to mean something, and typically something else than what the conventional meaning of that word is. So a good example and handy one in this research also is child, because if you look, and there are term banks and dictionaries and whatever on all these different let's say specialities. So people use different terms. So for example, in computer, you have a meaning for child in computer science, and it's just a term people use, but it's a term that has become kind of like a codified normal term, and everybody sort of knows in that area of research or area of work what it means. But these words are exactly the same words as you would have in conventional language. So when they are used, you don't actually know what the meaning is. It's the same word. Like all the letters are the same, but you don't know what the meaning is unless it's somehow footnoted or explained. And this is kind of the big realization I had through this process. Now, that's why it's called Certificate of Live Birth. Now, you can go and look what live birth is, and I can post links to the forum to these term banks, and you can check it out. So basically, that certificate then, interestingly, is dated. It's a signed and dated document, but it's dated on the birthday. So that was dated. It's a backdated document, obviously, but it's still dated on that date.
Is it significantly back? I mean, are we talking just the next day they did it, or is it like a month later they did it?
No, what I mean is that it's dated on the date when the C-section happened, but it's obviously not made on that date because it was late in the evening and they were in the operation theater.
So they catch up.
Yeah.
Did you have any trouble getting the certificate of live birth versus getting a birth certificate? Because on a Google search, which I've done multiple times, the term certificate of live birth always just gets kicked over to birth certificate in a Google search.
Yeah. Yeah, they don't want you to find that certificate of live birth. And nobody wanted to send these documents to me. It took a long time. It took more than a year to get these. So I had to go back and forth a lot.
It's a little different too, because this particular document, I'm guessing, has to come from the hospital.
Yeah. So this is a hospital document, and the birth certificate is a population register document. That's the difference.
People listening in this part of the world, what we're saying is, if you remember past episodes, the certificate of live birth would be the one the doctor in the hospital is signing in most cases here. And then the later version, the birth certificate, is the one that has been described as being made by the state and of lesser use than the live birth certificate, which Sui just informed you was very difficult to get his hands on.
Yeah. So then now think of all of these documents now as creating a record, creating a public record of what happened, because that's what they are. So now we're at the moment where they issue from the hospital a certificate. And, if you look at the local laws, typically you would have a law which mandates the government to do this or the hospital to do this. And here they actually require for them to issue three authentic copies of this. I don't know why. I don't know who gets those copies, but there's 3. They need to produce 3. It's specifically mentioned in the law or the statute that sort of says that. So now this one, it's a form template, and all of those boxes on the form have some kind of a title of what to write there. But as we've seen, you don't know what those words actually mean, because they can be terms of art or they can be normal words. So this one, you have the information about the baby filled in. And note this. So in the previous document, you had 2 measurements, the placenta and the boy, separate from each other. But in this one, you only have the measurements of the boy.
And this is the certificate of live birth we're describing, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So already at this point, if we look at what Kallenbach and other researchers have said, this is all fake already. This is not the truth. Only document that has the truth in it is the C-section report.
Because it evidences you as a whole man.
Yeah. There's no separate pieces.
Right.
It's one thing. Same DNA. Everything is from the zygote.
You just pointed out a crucial thing, because in the minds of most of us that have been listening along, we get the impression that the importance of the certificate of live birth from KL and others, but what you're pointing out here on the chronology that you've carefully put together is even by the time you get to the certificate of live birth, the fraud is already perpetrated.
Yeah, it's already fake. And on top of that, on top of the fact that the content of that document is false and untruthful, nobody knows what this information means, what it's supposed to mean. So if you know law, if you've studied law, you know that the intent is a really crucial thing in basically in everything. What's written, if you have a contract, it's very crucial to know what the intent was.
You have to know that. You have to have a meeting of the mind. So this is fraud on a whole other level, because as you pointed out to me earlier, even the people who made the document don't know what the damn words mean.
Exactly. So, and that's very clear from the correspondence. They don't know. They don't even know what I'm asking. I sent them like 250 questions, and I got very few answers, and a lot of answers where they outright say, "I don't know. We don't know what this means." And I dug out those terms of art, and I have like 5 different meanings for one word, and I'm asking which one of these meanings is supposed to be interpreted in this document, and they say, "We don't know. We have no guidelines."
Unreal. Okay. And that kind of speaks to the length of how long this fraud's been going on, doesn't it?
Correct. But it's good. This is all good, because this is so obvious. This is so evident. This is just total nonsense. Okay. And then there's an interesting detail on that certificate of live birth. There's a little sentence on top saying this is to be issued for every live birth, kind of indicating that there's multiple live births here. And then another interesting detail is that the live birth is written in a funny way. So basically, the live is, you have the letters separated from each other. So you have one letter space, another letter space.
Wow.
So it's not correct, grammatically correct.
That almost feels like if that was done in the country I live, I would suspect that it's an acronym, right? Where each letter represents something, but I didn't, that's strange.
Or it's plausible deniability, or they are also misleading the people who work there, because then they can say that, well, whatever you filled in there, this doesn't mean anything.
That's crazy.
It's all like
unreal.
Ridiculous. Okay, so basically I asked, why is it written like this, and what's the grammatical meaning? What does this word even mean? So nothing back, of course. These guys can't answer these questions. But it's good to ask these questions, because, as you know, not answering a question is a legal act. So basically, if they don't, it's the kind of the same thing as silence is acquiescence.
Yep.
But it's not really the same thing, because silence in itself is not the thing. It's the fact that you stay silent. Then that's an act. It's not a word. It's not an expression. It's an act. And the act is what matters. So the act of staying silent is a legal act.
And it becomes a bit of a proof in the way you're laying down everything you've gathered.
Exactly. So now I have more than a year of correspondence where they basically dig themselves in a hole. So this is the last document. The certificate of live birth is the last document where you have any reference to any biological matter. Everything from there on is there's no reference to anything biological. There's no weight measurements and nothing. And also on this certificate of live birth, and this might vary from country to country, but in my case, there's no name on it. So there's no name. There's just the measurement. And then that document, according to the registrar, is sent to whoever is sort of in charge of the population register, which at the time was the church. In many countries that used to be the case, especially in Europe. So then they take the information and they start producing the next document.
The church does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is the notification of a child to the population register. So it's not the certificate itself, there's this additional document in between. Now, this document dates forward from the operation date 2 months and 3 days. So basically 2 months, 3 days later, they issue this document. There's 2 copies of this. I got both of them. One is from the church archive and one is from the registrar, the population register archive.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's make a point here for people in my part of the world. First of all, what you should know about Sui is the church he's referring to is almost certainly Protestant, okay, just to get it on the record. I don't think in most places in the United States we have this interaction with the church per se. I could be wrong, but I think the population register, as Sui describes it in his part of the world, might be equivalent to the United States calling it the state document, because to me it seems like the documents that are generated have a similar purpose. So it is possible, and I don't know this for sure, that what Sui is calling the population register, like for me, would be the state of California. Okay, go ahead, Sui.
Okay, so when I got this process description originally from the registrar, she said that the process is the hospital, and then the next step is the church or the police, and then it's back to the population register.
The police?
So, police. So I basically brushed off that police part because back at that moment, because I thought they meant people who had a civil marriage, or, if you're not part of the member of the church, so then you would go to the police to do the kind of like the magistrate registration, whatever. I don't know anything about that, but I was assuming that's the reason. But then that particular detail comes in later on. I'll explain it. I found out what it might mean. Okay, in any case, it was the church. But important thing, the church was operating in the capacity of the record keeper. So they were operating in the capacity of a state's official when they were doing this document.
That's a huge tell. Even though for most parts of the world this has changed, it even shows you that a Protestant church system is still in the loop here. And I think that's a crucial piece of evidence.
Yeah, it was the hardest source to get information from. They were very hostile from very, very beginning. Everybody was like, I had to do some email correspondence with the head of legal department of the church to get this. So,
how can that be, Sui? These people are in charge of your spiritual existence. They recognize the zygote, right?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think they recognize it better than many people guess.
Yep.
But I got it, and all good. So now it's more evidence. So, okay. So what do? They fill in some of the information there, which is basically the parts of the information that you can find on the hospital documents, but no measurements of anything biological.
Like what? Are we talking dates? What? See, the church has no direct linkage for the church to be filling anything. So are we talking just dates and things?
Yeah, no. And get this. My first question was, who gave this document? Because this is signed by the church. This is not signed by my parents. So this is the notification that created the population register entry. And it's given by the church. It's not given by my parents.
Like a bishop or something? Do you know who actually signed it? Were they high ranking or was it a functionary?
Well, that's another funny detail here, because it's signed by the stamp of the church. It's not signed by hand.
Further
so basically nobody knows. And I asked who signed this, and they said that we don't know. There's just a stamp as a signature. And I said, well, who used that stamp? Who did this document? Who's the author? And we don't know. No, we don't have any records.
The body politic.
When you're saying the church, is it the same church that your parents are members of?
Yeah, so this document is interesting because basically the church first fills in information that they at least say they got from the hospital. They couldn't specify who gave that information to them, and they did not say that it came from the certificate of live birth. So they just say, we got it from the hospital. Nobody knows who and when and how. Okay. But you somehow got this information here. And then there's another section on that document, which is hand-filled, in probably by my parents. And that's where they put in the name. And they sign it by hand, but in the signature box, it specifically says that they're signing in the capacity of an informant. So they are not giving the document. They're not creating the document. They're just informants. And then there's the godparents who are witnesses and all that.
So when you say informant, is there something about the art of language to let you know that, or are you just understanding that they are giving information which makes them an informant?
No, so this is the crucial part. The big realization is this. I asked them, who owns this document? And who gave this notification? And they said the church. So the church is notifying the register, not my parents. It's their document. It's their creation. Yeah. It's not my creation. It's not my parents' creation. The information they filled in, they got from somewhere, they don't know where, and they signed that document. They give the information. It's their creation. They are the author. So that whatever they created is their creation.
Let me ask you a question here, and if you tell me it's none of my business, I'll understand. So what we're looking at here is every living being that comes into the world is being implicated in the church, first of all, regardless. But it occurs to me that what's being done here is most people are going to end up being baptized. If you don't mind me asking, were you baptized at a later date?
I don't remember.
You don't remember, but I'm guessing that's part of the intent to further suck you in.
Well, look, I don't, and that's a great question, because I can say I don't remember, and these records that you've produced, you've shown me now, they are wrong.
Right?
It's got nothing to do with me.
And it's fraud because they have no firsthand knowledge of anything.
Exactly.
But it doesn't matter because the thing they're commenting on is a fraud in the first place already.
Yeah. So my question to them was, this name is here. The name is now, you're sending a notification. You're notifying the register of this name. So which biological matter got this name? Because there's nothing on this paper. You can't pinpoint who this name is given to.
We kind of know, though, don't we?
Yeah, because the earlier documents, of course, they evidence that there's two things here.
So this is the lost at sea. This is the supposed dead entity that doesn't exist in our world being imaginarily brought to not life. And then insinuated into a system that is so foul that I'm surprised we don't plug our noses every time we walk in the street.
Yeah, and then it's all over the place. There's two copies of this same document, one which is at the registrar, and one which is at the church archive. Now get this: the content is different. So there's some differences between the documents.
Identify the two documents, Sui, so we don't get confused.
No, so there's I'm talking about the same document, notification of a child to the population register, which was created by the church and sent to the population register in order to make a population register entry. And there's two copies of this document. So there's the copy that's at the church, and then there's the copy that the registrar received. And there's some markings on the registrar copy, which is sort of in the sequence, the later one, that nobody can explain what those markings are and why they are there. So somebody added some codes on the paper, and nobody can say who did that and what do they mean.
What do they look like?
Well, kind of the same as you would have on your dollar bill.
It's like numbers and letters?
Numbers and letters, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's on the Social Security card, and that's on the birth certificate.
Yeah, but it's not any number that I've seen before.
Can it be searched? Have you tried to take those
I haven't
votes?
been able to track it. Everybody refuses to answer. Everybody just says that we don't know. And look, get this. I'm emailing directly with the chief inspector of the registrar. And she doesn't know what that is. They have the paper.
KL said that those were file numbers.
Yeah, they're probably file numbers, but file numbers of whose file numbers are these?
I know whose file numbers they are.
Is there another? Yeah, is there another party here?
Let's just sum up really quickly. So I know damn well whose file numbers those are. It's a thing that doesn't exist, that is going to be a ball and chain for the rest of our lives. But let's make a point here. In the way this has been described, I'm going to ask a simple question, and I'll just leave it out there. But I'm not trying to insult people, but this is evidence beyond. You can't argue what's been laid out here. Was the church ever there in this situation to minister to the spiritual concerns of a human being? Not a fat chance in hell. What they were actually there to do was to create the straw man, the lost at sea identity, the fraud that has perpetrated the modern era. So, and the reason I made such a big deal to say, hey, man, this is Protestant church, is everyone thinks there's a break between the Catholics and the Protestant. Poppycock all day long. They're both engaged in the same overarching thing, which is what we are describing here.
Yeah, look, but don't be too harsh, because most of the people working in these institutions have no clue what they're doing.
True.
They're reading these papers the same way as we are.
And don't understand.
They know even less about this terminology in terms of art and whatever. And it's always been done like this. And they get some kind of somebody else who did it before just teaches them, you take this and you write it in this box.
So the reason I brought this up is this is the whole idea of joining groups. What you're saying, the people working there are probably good, decent people for the most part. That's the point.
Yeah.
But the overarching organization has been up to no good, and it is such secret no good that even the bishop there probably has no idea what these documents are doing.
Maybe. I asked them, okay, these are all templates. So this notification is a template form. Again, it's like a paper with boxes, and the boxes have little titles in them, what to write in them. And then there's even a little side note on it saying that please see the instructions, basically on how to fill in the document. And I said, well, can you send me those instructions that this document refers to? And they say, no, we don't have it. Okay. Then the next question was, well, who created this document template? Can you ask whoever created this, what did they mean by these terms? We don't know who created it. Okay. So it's pretty crazy. And now, so now it's in. So they sent that in, and now we have a population register entry.
That goes from, I just want to keep it straight here. So what you're describing is it went from the church to the population register?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then somebody punches it in on a computer system, or now everything, by the way, probably now happens electronically. So it's probably even more difficult to get these. And the meaning of words is probably even more obfuscated. But basically, this information goes there. And remember how much crucial information is now already dropped out of these documents. So this is like a Chinese whisper, right? Because it's documented over and over again, and the content is always different, and the actual government entity who fills in the forms is different. So at this point, nobody knows what the meaning is anymore. So and now they make the registration. So then you can take out from that register, you can take a birth certificate. And they say that, we have this kind of an entry in this record. So this is a public record. And this birth certificate is here. So we have this record here. But when you dig in how that was created, it's just all over the place. It doesn't mean anything, or nobody knows what it means. And it can mean 1,000 things, because you have 4 or 5 documents here with unknown meaning and unknown authors.
Sui, we got about 15 minutes. Can we get through the rest of hour one notes in that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we're at the we just have the correspondence left.
Okay.
So basically, in that sense, my conclusion is that the birth certificate doesn't mean anything, because you have like 200 ways to rebut that. If you have these documents, nobody can answer this. It doesn't matter, and it's total
Undefinable. Would you use that word? You can't define what's actually there.
It's unknown. Somebody, I don't know if anybody knows what those terms are supposed to mean, but if somebody claims that they know, then they should be able to explain it.
Doesn't there have to, you see, this is, as you were describing this, and I've already heard the first conversation we had, what I began to think about this time as we speak is don't the existence of these documents have to be backed up by a law somewhere? Didn't a law have to be passed to say, this is how we do it? This is how you conduct yourself. But the more that I hear you speak, I'm wondering if that even happened, or even a policy, even a corporate policy. Here's our corporate policy. Yeah. Our corporate policy demands that we have these documents and these procedures. But as you're pointing out, there's not apparently a living soul that you can get a hold of that knows.
Yeah. So now for the correspondence, the emails that I have, there's a ton of them. They confirm a bunch of things in their replies, although they don't answer a lot of specific questions. But they confirm, first of all, they confirm the process of what I described, how that happens, how the information sort of flows through these different parties and then ends up on the register. Or actually, I should say that that whole process creates the register, or the record, if you want. That whole process is a record, is a public record that then ends up being a register entry. But the whole thing is a record. And then they confirm that the government is the author of all of these documents. So this is their record. It's not my record. It's their record. They created something, and they describe something that they created, and they put it on their record. So they are the author of. None of these documents are done by anybody in my family.
No direct witness, no direct knowledge, none of that, basically. Yeah. And I would further point out before you continue, this just didn't happen where Sui lives. Everyone listening to this, almost certainly, what does that tell you about our world? But go ahead, Sui.
So then they say they don't know what the terms are supposed to mean. They didn't even know that there are terms of art. They have no knowledge who filled this information, where did it come from. And then they also give out a very crucial piece. Again, they said that, because I started asking, how do you know this information is correct? They said, well, see, in government operations, you don't need to question the information that you get from another official. So if you get information from another government entity, it's presumed to be correct. And I think that's a very, very, very important thing to realize here. Because now that Chinese whisper just became their truth.
Does that have to be certified? So they don't require. No, it's just whatever is said is accepted.
Whatever they get, it's authentic in their world.
Wow.
So what they did was that they created a record which they only can interpret, and it can be interpreted in 1,000 different ways, because they are the only ones who supposedly know how it's supposed to be interpreted, and they don't need to question it. So if this record is used, for example, in court, the court doesn't need to question it. That's the truth that then needs to be rebutted by whoever says that that's not the case. Now, how do you do that?
You're doing that.
Yeah. Well, if somebody wants to talk about that, I can produce a couple of documents.
Right.
So they have a record which they assume to be correct. And because they can presume that it's correct, they got it from another official, they don't need to question it. So that's a big one. So it's basically a legal fiction. They created it. They take it as the truth. They know it's incomplete information. It's unknown meanings, unknown sources, but it's true. In their view, in their system, that's the truth. And by the way, that's the only record. And this is important. This is Kallenbach talk about this also. It's the only record. So what record are you going to use if you start rebutting it? You have to use the same record. So you have to dig into their record and be able to show where did they go wrong. Or you going to have to be able to grill them on what does it mean, where did they get it from. And that's why I think this approach works pretty well, because now there's like a suitcase full of documentation that I can put on the table.
All right. Well, I'll start to sum up. Is this a good time to sum up?
Yeah.
I'm chomping at the bit to get into hour 2 so we can start to outline what all this evidence is, if that's the correct word. But I would point out here, we've gone at law a lot of different ways. Some law more specifically towards the idea of being born or when does a human life start. We owe a debt to certain people. Kallenbach. Without what Kallenbach did, we would all be flipping in the breeze to some degree. All the people who have come at it from different angles. Sui now, who spent Lord knows how many months of his life trying to track this back. And there are some differences here, but there are some things that the work done here proves beyond the shadow of doubt. How is it that some place in Scandinavia is up to the same thing that some place in Texas is up to, or Japan, or Lord knows, most places in the world? How did that happen? I think we all know how that happened. How is it that a Protestant church is engaged in the same process that we were reasonably sure was started by the Catholic Church? There's an overarching system that was put in place, and some of the work that Sui's done here, like the art of a term. Nobody knows what the hell these things made or where they came from, or even why this form needs to be filled out or why we are filling it out in the way we are. But that had to start somewhere, didn't it? And so I just want to say thank you, Sui, for all your work. And Jason, do you want to get anything in? I want to wrap up and get into hour 2 here.
Well, I don't know if he has the answer, but I'm curious if the church aspect of this is removed in certain countries.
Yeah, I don't think it works like that anymore. Yeah, I don't know. Different countries have different systems, but obviously there is another route. So basically, I think these days you would just fill in something at the hospital, and then that's pretty much it. Or I don't know. I really don't know.
I know. I know for here. There was a little bit of that kind of going on. Typically what you were doing is stating what your religion. Are you Catholic? Are you Protestant? Are you Baptist? But when I was born all the way back in the 60s, there was this idea that after you stated your religion, there was going to be a baptism, further trying to seal the deal of some supposed contract that had been entered into, or whatever you want to say. But it doesn't matter, because we're going back to decades ago that shows in certain parts of the world what had been taking place slowly morphed away. But we can still implicate that the church had a place in that. What I'm waiting to hear about, too, is it's interesting to me that the police were involved all the way back there. I want to hear a little bit more about that. But guys, can we wrap up this hour and prep for hour 2?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right. So there it is, man. So interesting. So much work done to get an actual, factual, chronological breakdown of what occurred at the so-called birth of our guest in the nation which he resides. That's the first hour of episode 301. Join us at crow777radio.com for hour 2, where we are going to try to demonstrate what all this evidence amounts to. In other words, what can we deduce that is provably correct? Although I'm guessing a lot of you listening understand exactly where the fraud took place and what's gone on. I mean, I'm not sure we have an equivalent where I am, where the placenta and the afterbirth gets measured and documented, and the living boy or girl. Crazy. But join us on the other side at crow777radio.com, and we're going to break this down into as much factual evidence, or the result of facts that come from the evidence, as we can. There it is, man. I'd like to wish you all a happy, healthy, and higher-minded new era. Cheers. right, man. Welcome back to Crow 777 Radio. This is hour 2 of episode 301. Jason Lindgren is back with me, as is Sui Generis. And again, that is a Latin term and a pseudonym for our guest. These are fascinating episodes, and the amount of work that our guest put in to put a chronological, factual timeline down of what happened when and what documents were generated when. If you gain nothing else from this episode, and I'm guessing by the time we're done with hour 2 and our guest begins to describe what he can factually deduce from this, we'll just call it an evidence chain. I guess that's a decent way to describe it. There are overarching things that you should become aware of. What happens to the placenta in the modern era? Not all the way back then when things maybe were much different. Now, I've had emails from people saying, oh, I'm in a birthing ward and this is what we do with it, but we don't know where it goes. How about those codes on the bottom of the later, what we would equate with the birth certificate or other things? It implies, nobody seems to know what it means, but it implies that there is an organization somewhere in this world who does and has an infrastructure to deal with it. But overarching all of this, what one mind should be able to put together is this is just another link in the chain that brought us to 2020. What organization, all maybe hundreds of years ago, could have possibly had the reach to implement this? How is it that a supposed Protestant church, which said the Catholic Church sucks and we want nothing to do with this, are engaged in the very same process? How are these things possible? And more than anything, and Sui made a big point of this, and I'll make a big point of it. The people working in these organizations are not bad people. They're doing their jobs, and they almost certainly have no idea what is being uncovered here. But nonetheless, at some time, Lord knows how long ago, the system was created. And that's really what we're about here, because at some point, I would imagine the work we've done and others, this is going to come crumbling to the ground. And doesn't that underscore so much of what has happened starting in 2020? The jig was up, right? The system can't keep cruising along. Too many people can see without the glasses. Our currency can't go on. The fraud can't be perpetrated longer. Everything has to change now. But anyhow, welcome back, Jason.
And good afternoon.
All right, I'm rearing to go here. Let's just jump right back in. Welcome back, Sui.
Thanks. Good. Yeah, so I had a few thoughts. First of all, occurred to me here that what they showed was basically that no one single department at their end has this whole record. And I think that's quite significant because I have it. But none of these individual departments that I correspond with, they don't have the full picture. So there's no way they can answer these questions. And that also shows the compartmentalization in this process. And that's probably by design, because if people see this whole story and the whole process, then too many questions pop up, right? Internally would pop up at their end. I think that's kind of part of it. So, and that's how they can keep these good, innocent people creating this record, which is totally fraudulent and untrue. Because, they just do one piece and then they pass it on.
It's crazy to understand logically that some entity had to put this in place. And we know this because it's happening everywhere in all the so-called modern countries of the world. I don't know to what degree this would go down to sub-Saharan Africa. I assume some of those people are actually freer than we are. But you see, what you notice is what they don't have is the level of commerce and creature comforts we do. There's almost no separating the idea that we can buy cool things from what we're talking about, is there?
Yeah, it's amazing. One giveaway from this is the question that who created these templates that they push to us? Because whoever created those templates, the forms that they want us to fill, must know this stuff, because the terms they use on those forms are, first of all, they are standardized terms of art, and then they are interchangeable between languages, which is a huge thing, because these term banks, they codify these terms and make them interchangeable between languages, so that the one specific meaning of one word points to another specific word in another language. So I think the term banks are a massively revealing part of this. I can send you links. I can put on the chat the links to one of the term banks. It's just unreal. There's like, I have it up actually. There's like 8 million terms on this term bank. And you can just search in all different languages. So you click one word, you search one word, it gives you 10 different meanings for that word. And then each meaning it has a number. And that number, if you click that number, then you know that specific meaning of that word. And then you have the translations for that specific word in other languages, which is, again, they are terms of art, not the word in the normal sense.
All right. So when this episode 302 goes live, I'm assuming we'll see you in comments under the episode, and you can maybe add some links in for folks.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. All right. Well,
okay.
let's get into this. What do the documents outlined in hour one? What do they evidence?
Yeah, let me first, just one more quick thing. How did I get these? Because I think this is important. People need to hear how easy this was in a way. It took a long time, but it's easy. Because basically, I got this by email. I got everything by email. And the weird thing, it's kind of some kind of a tell as well here. That what I did was, when you have government organizations and they do all kinds of public tenders. So they buy pens and papers and whatever. So they do this. And for those are typically the offers are sent in by email, because they have typically like a specific time and date when they need to be sent in. So they need to have this kind of like a special email address where they send these things to. So it's like a mailing room email address. And most of the public organizations have that. It's somewhere on their website, or you could just call and ask that. So what happens when you send an email to that address is that it's automatically on their record, and it automatically sends a receipt back that they received that email. So it's like registered mail. And that's really handy because it puts it on their record directly. So I used that. So I just emailed to those addresses, because obviously I don't have email addresses of the head of legal at the church. So I just emailed that address and asked to forward it to somebody at the legal department or something like that. And I always got the automatic notice that they received it. So now that's on the record that I have asked these questions and they haven't replied in the cases that they didn't. Okay, so that's a handy trick. And then they always offered me to fill in forms. We have this form which you fill in and you can request to us to send this information. I never filled any of those forms. I just emailed them. And get this is the best part. I never gave my name. So I always just referred to, quote unquote, the person registered on the population record by the name XYZ. That's what I always referred to. I never identified as that person. And they still sent me all these documents. So that's in itself, it's a bit of a mysterious thing, but it reveals what's happening here.
Yeah, they make a big deal out of identity theft. And what you're pointing out is you could get everything you need.
Yeah, exactly. Or if I don't think that so many people would have made that kind of a mistake. They had to send it. So let's think about it. I don't have I don't have all the details of that, but that's what happened. Okay, so let's look at what this evidence means. Okay, so I said the pregnancy notes, they evidence that I was alive before the birthday. So my creation did not happen on that day. For me, that was just a violent day at a hospital. And then the C-section report itself, as I said already, it evidences me as a whole man. So that's the whole package in one being. The boy, the cord, the placenta, the caul, all of these different parts are detailed on that. So they specifically write, that there are these parts of this guy. And then in the latter document, they start separating these. But it's on the record that it's one full package as it is. And that's easy to back up by any medical literature.
Let's just sum up quickly. The pregnancy ward notes or the laboratory records give proof and evidence that you were alive before your birthday, which again gives the work of Kurt Kallenbach a firm nod of correctness about what the birthday is actually used for. And then as you get into the C section, all that evidence is laid down that you're whole, right?
Yeah, and it details all of these specific parts that Kurt talks about as well, because that's the truth. That's how biology works. There's the guy, there's the cord, there's the placenta, there's the caul, the water, and they documented it because that's what they do. They know, they are physicians, so they know how this stuff works. It's all there. So it's easy to prove. And if you don't have it, you can still refer to the medical literature. Say this is how it's done. There's tons of books about it.
Well, we're moving up to that violent act right now.
Yeah. Well, then the evidence for me of that day is that they cut the cord while my mom was asleep and my dad wasn't there. So my question is, who authorized that?
Wow.
How can they come in and take a defenseless child and start cutting off organs? That's insane. But it's on their record. So my question is, well, what's the medical emergency here? And everything that happened after that doesn't add up either. So why was that done? Another nice detail is that try and find medical literature about some negative effects of keeping the placenta attached. It's because there's nothing. It's all positive. The longer you keep it, I've been able to just find literature that says it's positive. And then there's all kinds of articles, arguing why you should clamp it and cut it and how many minutes you keep it attached. The animals don't need to do that. It falls off on its own. You look at lotus birth, where you keep the placenta attached. All kinds of positive health effects happen. So very fishy. Why did they do that? Well, and then they document it. So they basically say, yeah, we took your organ. Okay, so violent act, organ taken. Well, isn't that something like an aggravated assault causing serious bodily harm, which is legal definition of that? By the way, that term is used in the criminal laws in every country. You look at these laws and they specify that kind of an act, organ, looting, whatever it's called. But it's there. So is this criminal? I don't know. The evidence looks like it. And then you can look another thing, which is what Kurt pointed out as well. Look at the UN Palermo Protocols, which is the full name is the Protocol to Prevent, Suppress, and Punish Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children, supplementing United Nations Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime. So there's that kind of a UN resolution. Look it up. I can post the link. Article 3 details exactly the same thing.
Well, interestingly enough, where is it? Palermo, that's in Italy, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so it's written out there. Article 3 details exactly that, and some other things as well. But, it's there. It's not supposed to happen. Okay, because it is my organ. So the record evidence is me, my origin, and my correct status, if you want. And then also it evidences all kinds of weird stuff that happened that I don't remember, but I'm glad that they now produced the evidence showing what they did. I don't know if that kind of stuff goes old, maybe. Okay, then let's go to the birth report. So basically, as I said, this details the separated parts as individual entities.
Can we back up for just a minute? The notes here point out a very important thing before you do the birth report. And you kind of said it, but I want to make a good point because the notes are so succinct. Here's what the notes Sui provided us say. According to medical literature, the placenta is my organ and the same DNA. All of the 4 parts, the boy, the cord, the placenta, and the caul, germinated from a single cell. And that was fertilized at the zygote, and therefore they are all the living boy, as Kurt has spent so much effort talking about. The boy's mom built part of the placenta but that building of the placenta was done for the benefit of the living boy. So the living boy is the beneficiary of the mom's side of the placenta, and the living boy is the owner of the other side of the placenta, the cord and the caul. And then in bold letters, the critical point. I asked him before we got into this, our guest Sui, are you going to do anything to change your standing? But he said, I already have. And this is where we've had a sticking point with Kurt, because so many people, well, what do we do? And Kurt just says it's already done. And it becomes unsatisfactory. But here again, we see the same tack Kurt took. All of the above evidences my true origin and my correct status. And a lot of people aren't content with this. But the truth is if the system is foul, do we interact with the foul to try to reestablish the standing? Or as Kurt has said, and as it being said by our guest here, the evidence is on the table. The correct status is proven. So I just wanted to make all those points, Sui, because it has been a sticking point and it's caused a lot of uproar, more than folks listening know. I would say, right, Jason?
Yeah, this is that's the way it is, because basically, look at it the other way around. Are they making a claim with their record? Are they making a claim of my origin? Are they stating something about my origin within their record? I think they are. So they need to prove it, not me. They are making the claim, not me.
They're acting like it's an affidavit that nobody knows about, and then saying, oh, you know this thing nobody knows about, it's unrebutted, therefore it's true. And I'm here to tell you that's just versions of fraud. People have to understand to agree.
Yeah, so I don't need to prove their point or their claim, but I can. I can show it's totally nonsense with this evidence.
At what stage of this do you think they've got the legal fiction established?
Yeah, so let's get into that. It's an interesting one, but let's just fly through the other stuff that pops out here. So, the measurements I mentioned, that they record them too individually, and this is kind of, I think, where that really not so fun stuff starts, because then they start treating these two parts, the placenta and the boy, as separate entities. And note, they also give the timestamp of birth for both of these individually, and it's the different timestamp. The time of birth is there, and it's different for these two parts.
There's your fraud.
Why would they do that?
Yeah, there's your fraud right there. You were whole, so it's all one time. It's all one supposed birth. And just so people know, we're talking about Sui's birth report. But I mean, Sui, am I wrong? This is where it happens.
Yeah, exactly. And now, so the point is, if you record it like that, they are both fraudulent. Both the boy and the placenta are fraudulent, because both of them are not true. Neither one of them, first of all, exists individually, and secondly, was not created on that date and that time, which they called the birthday, or birth date, or birth time. So now they're creating two fictions. So I think that was a hard part for me to wrap my head around. But there's now two fictions on the record, and nothing is real from here on.
Wow.
So let's treat it as such, and let's look at how that can be then processing. Okay, so both are individually recorded. Then they give out this certificate. Now, okay, the certificate says this needs to be given to each live birth, first of all. Then the specific one, the certificate of live birth that I got, has only the measurement and the timestamp of the boy, the fictional boy. Nothing about the placenta. So what happened to that part? I called it in my correspondence a material omission, because they left out some material, right?
Wow, good point.
Yeah, that's a material omission.
Yeah.
Literally. Okay, so it's not true. And then let's look at the notification. So that's it. Now this is already deep in the swamp. So basically, this is all like a narrative now. But basically, the name is there, informed, not given. but then the church is giving that name or registering that name. So with what authority are they doing that? And my question is, who are they informing that name to? So like, what's the link here? What's the link to me? Because remember, there's no identification of any biological material anymore on that notification. The certificate of live birth has it, but this one does not have it. So there's not a single document where the name and any biological matter is on the same page. And that's part of the Chinese whisper here. Because now basically it's up to the one who interprets these documents to make that connection, whether it's a government official or somebody who thinks that the registered person is them. Right?
I might be able to, because you put this by saying under whose authority, I might be able to take a stab at that, Sui. You want to hear my educated guess? I think under the authority, fraudulent in my view, it is referenced in a book called Shogun by James Clavell, where the pilot who comes from Europe is shipwrecked on the shores of Japan. And there's an ensuing fight against the people who are Protestant, which the pilot is, and the Catholics, which are trying to infiltrate Japan. And at one point, the pilot, who is Protestant, is telling the shogun, you got to watch out for these Catholics because they have this king called the Pope, and he owns you. And the shogun of Japan says to the pilot, what the hell are you talking about? How could he possibly own me? The pilot then verbatim outlines the papal bull, which is still in force to this day, as far as I know. I could be wrong, but I think it comes from around the 1400s. I'm not sure, but it's a papal bull that makes the claim that the Pope owns everything, even things not yet discovered. Is it possible that that papal bull, which I suspect is still in force, is the authority or fraudulent authority you asked about?
Yeah, so let's think about it, because I'm getting sort of into that here. If you make that kind of a document and use that kind of authority, how are you going to back up that you have that right to do that?
By hiding it.
Yeah, one way to do it is to make everybody assume you have it and then just...
True.
But that might not be prudent enough. I would say that you need some kind of a narrative or some kind of evidence to back up your position there. So I think, we might come to that here. So at least I'll try and explain how I see it.
Okay. Because
now the timing comes important here. Again, I mentioned that the notification is given about 2 months after the violent episode at the hospital. And what happens in 2 months? So the last record of the organ of the placenta is that the hospital has it. They do some measurements on it, and then it vanishes. Okay. Now, if that's my property, it's like the jacket that I forget at the garderobe or whatever. And then it becomes like lost property, right? Because there's nothing. It just vanishes. Nobody takes it home with them. So if it's left there, you look into the local property laws anywhere, any country, I would guess, and they clearly state, in this case, it states specifically that if there's property that is lost in a government building, it becomes property of the state in 1 month if it's unclaimed. So remember, there's 2 months in between. They sit 1 month, and now the property is their property. And from that point on, they don't need to tell anything, because now the assumption is that it's theirs. So all the record they create, nobody can ask for those records. It's their record. It's their property.
That's a fraud too, though, just to get it on the record. They know whose frickin' property it is. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but that's that. Yeah,
Just making the point.
But
Go ahead.
this is so all over the place that
Right.
they can make any claim. But I'm just saying what kind of laws they can back this up with, because the property is lost. They can say there's some weird lost property here, and it's been here for a month, so now it's ours. Now, what's the other thing that law says? It says that the government building or the department where the property is, they need to send it to the police. And that's why the registrar said,
"Oh my
refer
word.
to the police."
There's the police connection from our one.
I thought it would not be relevant here, but actually they are. They if they didn't send it to the police, they would be breaking the law.
I gotta ask the question. So, do you suppose the police got an envelope or a bloody box?
They have some kind of process for that, for sure, because otherwise they would be breaking the law, right?
Seems to me, unless they got a bloody box, they're breaking the law.
Yeah. So, okay. So now, and it doesn't matter. It can be any department. It doesn't make any difference if it's the police or not.
Wow.
But the point is that the ownership, again, on their record, on the public record, is transferred to the state. So now they have a being which is recorded, which has a birthday, which has a birth time, which has the measurements, right? And it's theirs.
And a name.
No, well, at this point, they don't have a name yet. They don't know what to do with it, right?
Oh, okay.
So they have it.
Right, go.
So now only 1 month has gone.
Right.
But then another month goes past and they get a letter from the church saying that on this day, with this name mother, there was a live birth at this hospital. And this is the name that the mother informed us to be given to that live born child. Right? Right. That's what the record says. Translate. So now the registrar, this is my hypothesis. If the property is theirs after 1 month, they can issue another birth certificate for it. Because if you look at the not birth certificate, they can issue another certificate of live birth, which is the hospital document. How could they do that? Well, you look at the term of art, live birth. And the way live birth is defined, it can, I'll read the definition exactly for you from that term bank. So live birth means the birth of a child who breathes or shows any other evidence of life, such as beating of the heart and then pulsation of the umbilical cord or definite movement of voluntary muscles, regardless of gestational age. So the point is that the evidence of life can be anything. For example, pulsation of the umbilical cord, which happens even after the cord is cut, and regardless of the gestational age. So this fulfills the criteria. Why is this term, my question is, why is this term live birth defined like this?
Right.
It's a ridiculous definition to begin with.
Intent.
But yeah, intent. What's the intent here exactly? And then, by the way, it says birth of a child. So that the word child here doesn't mean much, because if you look at child, it has like 100 definitions here. So, that can be anything.
Is any one of those definitions the placenta?
Yeah. So, okay. So, but it's there. And then if you don't believe that, you just go into the medical jurisprudence literature or the forensic medicine literature, which is fascinating because they would have books, and they have these books. So there's books where you have in the same section, they talk about live birth definition, they talk about inheritance, and they talk about monster births. Monster birth meaning deformed being. And there's like pages and pages of definitions of that, of what it means.
Well, monster also means human being in Black's law.
Yeah. So basically, the point is that just flat out, they can say that this is a live born child, and it's ours. So, and we can issue that certificate of live birth because it's our property and nobody's going to ask for that. And we don't need to send it to anybody. So if this, and this is all theory, but if they do that, then they send that document to the registrar, and then basically the registrar would have two things. The notification, which only has date, name of the mother, and the name that's supposed to be given to the child. And then they have a certificate of live birth, which is something else. And then they attach those two. And there you go. It's on the record. And by the way, since they cannot claim that that other being is alive, they probably could also issue a death certificate, which then makes the record only a record of something being born and perished, given a name, and so it becomes just like any dissident estate.
Yeah, but where would that possibly, wherever that would happen, I don't think you can really say they don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah, exactly, because they're just one paper here, one paper there. It can be totally different people. And as you can see in these documents, they drop off information. Yep. So what if the other certificate of live birth, for example, let's say they give it, but they don't have to put anything on it except the time of birth. It's not like you have to. There's not like you have to fill in these boxes. So they're just creating a paper trail, which is obviously all over the place. But the end result, because of the way the property law works, and because of the way these notifications are given, could result in a situation where there's a record of somebody being born and then subsequently dying, the name being on the record, and then somebody just thinking that they are that name. But in fact, what they are doing, they are administering, or they are being like the trustee of that dissident estate.
Which has been demonstrated, which brings up two questions, which still go unanswered as far as I know. Where does the placenta go? What becomes of the placenta, the afterbirth, and the call? The other thing is, where is the death certificate? Who makes the death certificate? Who receives and records the death certificate? But anyhow.
Yeah, so what I ask them, because I know they don't need to send it, but I ask them anyways, have you issued any other documents on any of the biological matter identified in these hospital records? Because, the evidence shows that it's my property. So, have you done something with it? Have you issued some documents using that material? Because if they have, then that would explain this nonsense. So it would explain that name was never given. It was given to something totally fictional. And now the only problem is that everybody in the family thought it's mine. Well, they used the same name. I mean, you can have different people having the same name. But basically, it's an assumption. It's a wrong assumption. So now basically what is happening is that they have a fraudulent record, and it's all over the place. So maybe somebody knows it's fraudulent. But because it's so bad, the evidence is so bad, they need us to confirm that record by identifying as that. And then if we omit those, let's say, problems and mistakes in it, then the errors don't matter anymore. So consent removes error. It's a maxim of law. If we say, okay, this record is fine, this is me, then none of this matters anymore. This is insane. That's kind of like something I would like to dig into. I don't know if I'll ever be able to find that kind of evidence, but that's one way this would make sense to me. Because basically, if you look at all these guys who look at the CQV Act, the trust, the STQV trust, it never made any sense to me, because some of the guys say that, they can assume you're dead because of some fire and whatever, and now you need to go and you need to get a certificate of life, and then when you can, a proof of life certificate, which is another document you can get from the foreign ministry. So basically, if you get that, then you can prove. Well, that document doesn't prove it. And that whole entire claim is so absurd. How can you claim that somebody's dead? It's ridiculous. But if they do it like this, then they actually have on the record, and it doesn't really. I don't think I don't know how much it matters what happens to the biological material. What matters is what's on the record, because then they take that record as the truth.
It's still a fiction.
It is fiction, but in their books, in their record, it's the truth, and they can act on it because they don't have to assume there's anything wrong with it.
So they've So basically, they've thrown common sense out the window for their procedures. If some official tells me this, then I accept it as true, which is further covering up the fact that it didn't matter whether you were claimed to have died in a fire or they produced some BS death certificate. It's just versions of fraud, right? But what you're pointing out is the system requires an operating method. So what you're laying down would provide the documents, except we don't know where the death certificate's coming from. But I would point out
it's the same hospital, probably.
Right. It seems
you need one pathologist at the hospital that is fraudulent. That's right.
We need an email. We will get an email someday that says, I work at the hospital. Here's where the placenta goes. A courier picks it up, or we stick it in an oven, or whatever happens. And by the way, here's where the death certificate is generated.
So have you exactly? So I think you followed a little bit this discussion on the death certificates and how the reason for death, for example, is this past year has been recorded.
Yeah.
So, this death statistics. How do you create how much you get paid for one reason of death versus another reason of death, right?
Yeah.
You know about this.
Yeah, you can create a fairy tale just by paying someone.
Yeah, exactly. So, would you think that this is totally out of the question?
No,
definitely not. There's one guy who clicks on, this is an authentic birth.
But it points to a very disturbing aspect. We know the end result demands that the things we're laying out occur at some point, but are there still employed living men or living women in a hospital or in the state who know damn well what they're doing, issuing fraudulent death certificates on a call and afterbirth? Is that really going on still?
Yeah. So
because if
this
it is
my question.
We should be able to discover.
I hope not. Yeah, I hope not. However, and the reason this evidence should be, people should get all this similar evidence from wherever they are, because now we can start making sure that doesn't happen. Because that would be outrageous, wouldn't it? Why don't we want to make sure that couldn't happen? Because I can already point out that could happen. People can make totally outrageous interpretations of these documents because they're so poorly made. That's, it's so evident here. So why wouldn't they make other mistakes? Let's correct these forms and it's done. I'm concerned. I'm just concerned of the process, right?
Right. You've proven that even the things that we don't know for sure have to be occurring somewhere.
Yeah. Of course, you can look at this in a very dark way, but you can also be an active
solution provider.
Yeah. Just, digging into this and saying, hey, why don't you define these terms better? Why not? Why did you define live birth like this? Why don't you just say that it's a living boy or a girl? Why do you need to define it like that?
Did you find any aspect to the money?
No, that I haven't. I don't. It's so complicated and all over the place. I haven't really looked into that. It's so hard. I have this one track where I'm just kind of skimming over a lot of different concepts and other researchers' material. But then this has been all about, let's put together one record where everything is on the same folder. And that's what I think that's why this is a neat, nice sort of proactive approach to take. This, but a lot of these people who are talking about this stuff are like, because in 2 weeks they will be in court and they have to come up with some paper that they think is going to solve everything. So first of all, why do you start doing this research at that point? We should be all doing this like from the moment we can read, because this is outrageous. So you need to be prepared. You need to do this proactively. And there's no conflict. I haven't made any claims. I've been just looking at these documents and saying, this is total nonsense. You can't even explain what this is. So how can you make any claims, or how can you assume that I believe in any of your claims? And they have no answer. So now, it's a pretty good set of material right there. And it's consistent with this other stuff that you have, these affidavits and the 6 questions that Alphonse put out. It's all consistent with this. If you look at he talks about who owns, how can you administer my property? Under what authority do you administer my property? Well, the question is, what property is he talking about? I don't think he's, you can talk about the guy, the living man, or you can talk about that piece that became their property, that they take as their property because of the way the lost property law works. But it's not actually their property. So but just by asking that question, if you interpret it as pointing to the lost organ, you just destroyed their whole narrative. With the last question, destroys the whole narrative.
There's another part of this. Where is the property? Did someone just make a document that stands in for the property? What's the legality of that? There's so many problems. And by the way, I'll just add it because I was thinking of it. Did anyone ever consider why in our world there are so many Marks, Johns, Davids, Matthews, Sarahs, Rebeccas, Jesuses, maybe even in the Middle East, why are there so many Muhammads? Do you see the underlying current of the overwhelming totality of what we're talking about here?
Yeah.
Crazy.
It's all over the place. But this is why I think this could be powerful. Is I've skimmed through a little bit of different laws in different countries, and they are compatible. And this is the money aspect. Maybe I can talk about. Is that if there is a money aspect to this, which I think there is, I just don't know what it is. It has to be compatible internationally. So that's why this documentation and all these terms of art are compatible with each other. That's why they have to have these term banks, so that they can have the French document match with the Spanish document, match with the English document, match with the Polish document, because they can link those terms, and then those become compatible in the financial system if it's used there. And that's my thought on that. The term bank is a huge giveaway.
Well, there's some things we can derive here. Let's go back to hour 1 where you were talking about you get this document back, and the word live or live is L space, I space, V space, E space. To me, it's not too hard to get to the bottom of. You don't know what the overall usefulness of this is to someone, but what you do know is the way you would use the word live or live is not the way it's being used. And this is the whole problem with the capital letters things, where people love to make that a contention of fighting. There is no contention. If you've written a thing in capital letters, it means something different than writing it in lower letters. Just like the 432 versus 440 tuning. It's different, period. You can't argue it's not different. And if it is different, it is not the same. And if it is not this, I mean, we can go on. But my point here is that live birth, I suspect it probably means something very different than we think it's supposed to mean using the word alive, live, life.
So the point is that it has different meanings, but it's the same word, which means that they can slap that word, that label on anything they want. And then later on in the process, people interpret that same label in a different way.
Right.
That's how they do the trick.
Right.
So you see what I mean? They take the placenta, they mark it live birth. And then everybody from then on thinks it's the baby, gives it a name.
Now, there's a point here that Alphonse made about, do you own me? And of course, they say no, but is the true answer, yes, they do?
Yeah.
On paper?
yeah, exactly. They have to be able to do that somehow, because otherwise they can't impose all these things on us.
Well,
so what he asked, "Would you own me?" They can't really answer that, but not maybe for the reason that he laid out in very much detail, because they can't answer. Of course, they can say, "Yeah, you're a slave," but they can't also say that, well, we have this other piece that is actually ours according to the law. But they don't even have to say that, because it's already working according to the law for
systemic.
their benefit.
Yeah. But let's take this up to the current era. We're in 2020, so if all these things we're talking about, which are, from my point of view, most of this is provably systemically true, why in the hell would people be making a claim that there's an inoculation that is patented, which means there can be a claimant behind a patent and it's going to modify people? See, it's the same thing all over again, which is why I think there's probably a there. What we're talking about is a sneaky way to make a claim on living man or living woman and even reclassify them as not living, and all the nonsense that this fraud is. But here in 2020, it's almost like we're seeing a queue up. It's almost like we could come back 200 years from now and there'd be some dude named Crow a lot later than now having a podcast saying, well, we're pretty sure it has something to do with the inoculation. You know, it's almost the same story being told all over, whether or not there's any validity.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of very detailed. I think the term I've sort of, I don't know if it's the right term, but I call it the operation of law. So basically, the way law or some of these statutes work without anybody having to do anything, that creates a bit of a problem, because people have wrong assumptions about what's happening. So, for example, these mandates, I was just doing a quick dig on that. So what does the mandate mean? Well, mandate, it's synonymous with obligation, right? But they use obligation a lot more in Europe and mandate in the US. But basically it means the same thing. Well, now, obligation is a contract law term. And obligation means that it's something you have to do once you have a valid contract. So that's the terms of the contract, that what does this guy do and what does that guy do once they have agreed on the contract. Now, if you look at it from the contract law perspective, what do you need for a valid contract? You need an offer, you need an acceptance, and you need intention to create a legal relationship.
You need one more thing. You need a meeting of the minds.
Yeah, so that's why the intention is there, together with these acts. So then what happens? So let's talk about the mask. So the way I've been describing this to my friends is, you don't have to say anything, but there's an offer on the table. And according to the contract law, you don't need to accept the offer by saying something or signing something, because the contract can be deemed accepted if the other party starts performing according to the terms of the contract.
Good point.
So, yeah, and that's an act of, that's indicating your intent to accept and your acceptance of that contract. So it's the act, and that's why silence, it doesn't cut it, but it's the act of silence that cuts it. In this case, once you put on that mask, then those conditions apply, and that's when they can enforce it with violence, but not before that, because that's the act that gives validity to the terms and conditions that nobody knows.
We should blow it out a little bit. So on this stage that the world is, if you perform or get involved in an act, it starts to count, starts to matter, right? So there's the lines drawn over to all the Hollywood nonsense, because words have meaning and they're using the same words. And early in hour one, he was taking on the word child. Well, there's 15 possible meanings. Which one is it? You can see what goes on. It's all sleight of hand, really. But that is such a critical point, that if you start to wear a mask, then you're performing as if you have accepted the contract in some other way.
Yeah, and there's the specific terms of art, again, legal terms of art for this. So when I dug into that, I found words that I never knew existed, and they specifically describe doing something that indicates that you accept something. And that's how it happens. That's how the law operates. So basically, or that's how these statutes operate. So basically, there's an offer on the table, and as soon as you start doing something, they can say, oh, well, it looks like you like this offer. So, okay, now the terms are binding, and now you can't get out of it unilaterally, because obviously you already accepted it, so you can't just wiggle out of it anymore.
So, Sui, we're coming to the top of hour 2, and if you want to get other things in, let me know. But I really want a little kind of verbatim. We've touched on it. I want to go over the last bullet point here with the sub-bullet points. What is a registered person? How do you identify a trustee? And what is identity? So can we just quickly blow through those? But by all means, if you have other things that you want to get in, let's do it.
Yeah, so that's been the question I've had here. It's like, what is that registered person? Because it has the same name, which is kind of like sounds the same that my mom called me, but I don't know if it's supposed to be that. So what is it? Like, is it an entity? Is it a trust? Is it the estate? Is it just some kind of whatever obligation? So I've been trying to ask that. Nobody gives an answer. It would make sense if it's a dissident estate, because then basically what you need is usually you have some relative or somebody from the family kind of taking care of the business that was going on when somebody passed away. So you can still kind of do business in the name of a dissident person, but you need someone else to be the trustee, to be kind of handling those things.
That would be decedent. So just to be clear, because it sounds like you're saying dissident. He needs decedent. Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, decedent is the way to pronounce it. Yeah, that's what I meant all along. Okay, right. So you need somebody to step in. And by the way, when you step in, that is the name that you are acting in. So basically, you are acting in the name of the decedent, not in your own capacity when you're doing that. Now, my question is, what if that's what's happening all the time because of this? So what if there is no record? Is there any record of me? Or am I just stepping into some other office that's actually a fraudulent office?
Oh, wow. I've never really thought about that. So to be a godly living man with the divine spark, there is no damn record, because living men with a divine spark don't need a record.
Yeah.
That's the idea, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
There's no record. And by the way, whatever they produced, whatever they sent, that record is false, because it doesn't describe me.
Good point.
So how can that be assumed that I'm on the record? I'm not. But if I say that I am, if I say that, yeah, that's my name, I'm acting in that capacity, or Kallenbach's really, really important point. If you say that that's your birthday, it does the same thing, because you were not created. That thing was created at that date, not you. So if you say, then they can say, well, that's so crazy claim that this guy must be acting in the capacity of a trustee for this decedent estate, because that's the only thing that was created, not that guy.
So I've so much of what Jason and I do, we run under the aegises of this happened, so the next thing will happen. In other words, quite often where we end up going and what we end up covering is because of the connections and the things that have happened based on what we've just done. I take care of an older person, so unfortunately, I have to try to put in earplugs and read in front of crappy TV and other things. But just last night, I saw this thing where they're claiming this dude got let out of jail in Jason's state, actually, some 27 years ago. And the poor man, there's no documentation. He doesn't exist. So they're making this big deal that he can't get his Social Security, he can't prove his birth certificate. They sent him a birth certificate, but it wasn't him. And all this is going on so that they can make the point how terrible it is to be without their fake identity. What are the odds that I would see something like that from Jason's state? I'm just saying. And that's in the news right now. And they're basically painting the picture of this man with the divine spark who at the moment is scot-free. I mean, scot-free. And they're saying he can't buy things, he can't work, he doesn't have a Social Security. He's basically a non-existent entity. When the truth of it is, based on what we've laid down here, is that man is free, isn't he?
Yeah, they're trying to make it sound scary.
It is
because
scary.
Because this is the thing. They have to have you identify as that.
Right.
The record shows that it's total nonsense. So there's no other way to make it work except you thinking that it's you.
So it becomes difficult to have a job.
Yeah. So that's the of course things like that would work out if more and more people do this, and
right.
You know. But the point is that their record, this whole thing, whatever it is, it doesn't work without us making it work by actually believing in it.
Right,
but it's kind of hard to believe in it once you see this record. This is total nonsense. Nothing of this is true. And if this is the record that you're using to assume something about me, then that's totally fraudulent or totally incorrect right from the get-go. So it can't work like that. So the only way it can work is that if I accept the mistakes and say, okay, we can still agree on this fake identity, and let's just don't mind about the fact that the record is total nonsense. Then they can do that. And that's why these things work. So if you hold on to the fact that I don't know what that name is, and that's, by the way, not my birthday. So what do you do?
Yeah, there's no moving forward from that point. That's it's a non-starter, isn't it? But we're running out of time, so I know we've touched on it, but let's be perfectly clear. How do you identify a trustee, Sui? Let's just quickly lay down very clearly. How do you identify as a trustee?
Yeah, so I think that's what they need us to do. So assuming again that there is this trust or decedent estate, they need somebody to identify as that. And that identification, that's why they ask your name and your birthday. Because if you give either one of them on their record, it shows that it's that trust or estate, not you. They just ask you. So it's like, which business are you, which company are you doing business in the name of? Basically, they're asking, are you running this company? And then you say, yeah, that's the name and that's the birthday. So it's kind of equivalent to giving a name of a business and the registration date of that business. And then, okay, so you're doing business as this entity. They don't mind about who you are, but they just need somebody to take that position, to step into that office, because that office is then liable for whatever happens in that name. Just like the company directors are liable for what happens in a company. They need somebody there. Nothing happens without your consent. And that's the trick. So once you see the whole record, you're like, if I agree to this nonsense, that just takes away all these fraudulent facts. It's like they never existed in their books. And that's the problem. And now again, let's look just the last thing, the identity. So ID cards and what's your identity, and you have to identify yourself and all that. What is identity as a word? You look at Merriam-Webster, it's sameness. It's like equals. It's the same thing. Sameness in all that constitutes the objective reality of a thing. Oneness. So basically you're saying that whatever this patchy record is, I am that. Oneness, sameness, it's the same, equals. It's not like it's sameness. So, and if you say that I'm the same, and they assume that that's their property, then you are their property. So the identity is a pretty dangerous thing.
Let me put this idea on your radar. All right. So we know it's the idea of sameness, the distinguishing character or personality of an individual. But it basically comes down to sameness. I'm with you because I just read through all the things. So there's a guy standing there and he's at the birth of someone coming into the world to take their first breath of spirit. And they cut the cord and they point to the living boy and say, "What's that?" And the observer says, "That's John." And they point to the cord and the umbilicus and the placenta and the caul, and they say, "What's that?" Well, a normal person would say, "Well, that's part of John." But if you omit the word "part of," that's John too, isn't it? Sameness.
Say, well, that's the truth. It is the guy. And by the way, just as Kurt says, it still is.
Yeah.
The fact that it's somewhere now. So look at it this way: if a hair falls off my head, it's still my hair. It's still my hair. You can argue that somebody finds it and then they make a claim on it, but it's still mine. The reason why they can make the claim is because they don't have the information on the table that it's mine.
But they did. And by the way, whose hair is it 30 days from now?
Exactly.
Oh, man. Yeah. Kurt, let's just close out here, since we owe such a nod to Kurt for his information that centers around the idea of the zygote. And I would say, of all the things I covered, that goes beyond the idea of an idea. There is a authenticity that transcends me calling it an idea, and I call damn near everything an idea because I understand that the mind precedes all. A lot of the falling out and a lot of the beef has been, okay, great, Kurt, what you're saying is true, but now what do we do? But you want to know something? Based on this episode and based on the episodes we've had with Kurt, and even I have probably been in error, he told you all you needed to know if you think about it. And so what we do is we think, okay, great, I know this true thing, but now I got to go to the man. I got to go stand in front of the judge, or I got to go down to the DMV, and how's it going to help me there? But you see, that is a mind still thinking trapped in the system, isn't it? And I think that's where the line was drawn by the people who have kind of come to understand at a different level. I'll give you one more shot, Sui. I'm getting ready to wrap up episode 301. First of all, I want to thank you. Secondarily, I've got to ask the question, will you be allowing people to contact you? And I will warn you before you answer that. If you provide an email address, you will be barraged beyond belief. Almost certainly, it's not guaranteed, but will you be providing a way for people to contact you?
So we can use your chat. And then what I was thinking is maybe I can create a new email address where people can send stuff, but I don't have any site. I'm not selling this information, or I don't give consultations or anything like that. I just wanted to share this. So I won't promise that I will start replying and corresponding with people. But sometimes at the same time, I agree that if somebody has a question, even sending it to somebody helps to structure the thoughts and helps the process. So maybe I'll create an email address and I can post it on the chat, and then people can.
So let's just be clear. The main goal of what Sui's done here is to shed light. Sui is taking the tack that this isn't right. We can demonstrate it's not right. Maybe there's some things we can contribute to correct this problem. And so if you're going to use the email that he's going to provide, he's not giving consultations. He's not acting in the capacity of an Alphonse. He's simply clarifying or maybe helping to understand a little more clearly this idea, which each of us in our knowing can help to maybe remedy. Maybe that's a better way to look at it. Jason, anything you want to add in before I wrap up?
Well, this is a great head start on figuring out how it all works. Next, we have to try and figure out how the money side of it works.
There's a couple things I would add. What happens to the placenta in the modern era? Where does it go? And is there a death certificate issued, and who the hell does it? And where does that go? And I'm with you all day long. Although the money side to me, Jason, it's important because it's clearly part of the reason we assume this happened besides control. But do I ever think anyone's getting access to that money? Not on a cold day in Hades. Look at how, in just what Sui has laid down, in the normal course of existing, oh, I'm born, oh, I have a job, these systems have been so convoluted and so compartmentalized. What would you imagine is true of any kind of value in currency of some sort, or gold or whatever? And that's one thing that's always bothered me about the QSV, or whatever it's properly called, is that these people are coming along saying, oh, there's all this cash that's been generated on you that you can gain access to. And to me, that's the wrong idea to start with, because what you're basically saying is, I like money, and if I can get the money, I'll be satisfied, when the real problem is exactly what Sui's laying down here. This is wrong. There's nothing right about this. And as it comes to light, it can probably be rectified. At the very least, if enough people understood the ideas that are being expressed, all the way from Kurt Kallenbach, all the way up through KL, through Alphonse, through every aspect of what happens to a living human being with the divine spark in this place now, maybe it will fall to the ground, because after all, every shred of it appears to be built on first ignorance, and secondarily being fooled into thinking things are true that are not true. And to me, I'm with you all day long. There's got to be we know there is, Jason. You've looked up the account that was set up in your name, and that is done basically on a stock market, for lack of better descriptive terms. But one more time, does either of you want to add anything else before I wrap up this fascinating episode?
Well, I'll definitely clarify what I mean by the money. I want to understand how the entirety of the system works, and therefore the money is the thing. Is our labor the thing that truly greases the skids of the entire world? Is that really how this works? And the answer is probably yes.
I would say.
But I want to know how the systems work. I want to know how it all funnels up. I want to know what the top of the chain is. I want to know all that.
Let me express this real quickly. I think you're right, Jason. For those that have read Dwelling of the Philosophers, there is a claim that Notre Dame and other of the cathedrals that matter were built before the Catholic Church was in charge. There is a claim in there that the average working skilled craftsman worked 14 weeks a year and were so well off that all the effort that went into building the cathedrals was donated. And so I think that if these things are true, it further underscores what Jason's saying is, yes, that's got to be true, and it's why we suffer much more than we need to. Sui, what were you going to add?
Yeah, so about the money thing. So I'm kind of thinking that could that be something that is like a fake carrot here? Seeing that if we just keep this system working, some people can be sort of bought off to not shake it. Like there's this fake carrot that you have this option of this huge amount of money. So that's the oldest fake, right? Whether it's there or not doesn't really matter, because people are just interested in that, and they don't want to question this structure because they might become a millionaire, right? But then again, ask somebody, in Zimbabwe, how much does that mean? They can just add zeros to the value of whatever measuring stick you're using.
Good point.
And it's all air. So which one is more important? Knowing the origin or some paper?
Yeah, that's part of the, if this is a trap, and by the way, I don't suspect anyone's ever getting paid in that way. Part of the story that's been proffered is, first of all, you hear, oh, there's so many dollars. Well, that's fiat currency. It's just paper. It doesn't mean anything. Why would anyone spend so much effort to get paper? But there's also another tale that goes along with it that I've heard, where your weight or something like that in gold and all this other kind of what I consider to be a lost leader is going on. But I'm with you all day long. But I'm with Jason too. It's got to be part of it. And if it is part of it, you would imagine that it would have to be something like gold. But at the end of the day, what are we all about here, folks? Do we recognize a system that is foul at its core that needs to be remedied? Because for me, that's what this is about. Would it be more important for me to cash out and get $200,000 and just walk away, or to try to remedy what we're looking at here? For me, all day long, it's to remedy what we're looking at here. I would like to know that some descendant of mine 100 years from now doesn't have to deal with this nonsense. For me, that's really why it matters. And it matters in the way as it relates to Kurt's observation that you gain the divine spark at the zygote. If that has meaning, then how can we get off that track? But there it is, guys. I'm going to wrap up. That's hour 2 of a very fascinating episode 301. And I want to thank Sui for all the effort and putting a chronology and the documents and what they basically prove and what they basically make one assume is probably going on. Maybe more than assumption, I would say. Something has to be going on, even though maybe we can't define the other things all the way. And another thing, we've taken another step to where I think I'm going to be sitting here one day and I'm going to get an email. I know what happens in this piece of it. I work here and I've seen this. That's where this heads, because we are coming to a crisis of conscience in the era we live. People are not going to be content to put on the mask and to go with the lies, and the world is going to change. The question becomes, are we going to have a hard time for the next 100 years, or are we going to pull up much sooner? Let's hope it's the latter of those two things. But there it is, man. I'd like to wish you all a happy, healthy, and higher-minded new era. Cheers.
So the shot of the day brought to you by Moderna.